That's a size extra large, by the way. Madison Thornton said it like she was doing me a favor. The hoodie slid across the boardroom table, company logo, cheap polyester, the kind of corporate swag they hand out at job fairs to college kids who don't know better yet. That's when I knew. The CEO's 28-year-old daughter was firing me. In front of the entire board, no warning, no performance review, just a public execution sandwiched between the new kombucha flavors announcement and Q3 revenue projections. My name's Sam Porter. I'm 59 years old. I'd spent 12 years building the backbone of her father's company, from 8 people in a strip mall office to 200 employees chasing a $68 million Series C funding round. 12 years of showing up at 6:30 in the morning. 12 years of being the guy who fixed things when everyone else went home. 12 years of building systems that actually worked while MBAs with expensive degrees talked about disruption in meetings that should have been emails, done in 60 seconds by someone who thought legacy thinking was an insult. Madison cleared her throat. She was wearing one of those blazers that cost more than my monthly mortgage, cream-colored, perfectly pressed, the kind of thing you wear when you've never had to worry about dry cleaning bills. Sam has been a valued member of the Viren family, she said, reading from notes on her tablet. Someone in legal probably wrote that line for her. But as we scale into our next phase, we need digital native leadership that can move us forward. Digital native leadership. I'd built the entire ERP integration system that kept their precious digital platform running. I'd written the vendor protocols. I'd negotiated the fulfillment contracts that kept their customers happy. But sure, I wasn't digital native enough. Here's the thing about board meetings. 12 people in expensive chairs, and not one of them will make eye contact when someone's getting fired. They all found something fascinating about their shoes. The CFO, Larry Bishop, studied his coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe. Rachel Murphy from HR looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Only one person was watching me. Richard Thornton, Madison's father. The guy who'd hired me 12 years ago with a handshake and a promise that we'd build something real together. Now he sat at the head of that mahogany table, jaw tight, saying nothing, just letting his daughter do the dirty work. Madison reached into a tote bag, another expensive thing with a designer logo I didn't recognize, and pulled out the hoodie. Company logo screen-printed across the chest. She set it in front of me with a $50 Olive Garden gift card tucked inside. "We really appreciate everything you've done," she added. That smile, the kind trust fund kids wear when they're pretending to care about people they've never had to understand. "Unfortunately, your Q4 performance bonus won't be processed. The metrics didn't align with our new KPI framework." New KPI framework. I'd written the original KPI framework, back when Richard actually cared about things like customer satisfaction and system reliability instead of whatever innovation theater Madison was selling to venture capitalists. Let me tell you something about getting fired at 59. It's not like getting laid off at 35. At 35, you've got options. Companies want your energy, your potential, your willingness to work 70-hour weeks for equity that might be worth something someday. At 59, you're expensive, you're set in your ways. You ask inconvenient questions like, is this legal? And did anyone actually think this through? You remember when handshake deals meant something? I stood up slowly, picked up the hoodie, felt that scratchy polyester between my fingers, the kind of fabric that pills after one wash. The gift card fell onto the table. "Thanks for the memories," I said. My voice came out steady, calm. Not because I wasn't angry, I was furious. But fury's for amateurs, and I'd been doing this work since before Madison learned how to drive. I walked out of that boardroom with my head up. No slamming doors, no dramatic speeches. They wanted a meltdown, some story about the angry old guy who couldn't handle change, something they could pass around slack to make themselves feel better about what they'd just done. I gave them nothing. Just the quiet click of dress shoes on hardwood and the faint smell of that expensive lavender diffuser Madison had installed because she read somewhere that scent affects productivity. Outside, it was 70 degrees and sunny, perfect California weather, the kind of day that doesn't care if you just lost 12 years of your life to someone who got her job title because of her last name. I sat in my Silverado for a few minutes. 2015, 200,000 miles, runs like the day I bought it. Still had that new truck smell somehow, mixed with coffee and the faint scent of WD-40 from the toolbox in the back. I didn't update LinkedIn, didn't post some fake optimistic on to the next chapter goodbye with a sunset photo. didn't call my daughter to tell her what happened. Instead, I pulled out my personal laptop, the one I'd never connected to company Wi-Fi, the one with a very specific file stored on an encrypted partition that I'd backed up 3 different ways. The file was labeled MSA Section 8.4C would trigger.pdf. Madison might have just fired me, but I was the one holding the key to their entire operation, and she had absolutely no idea what she'd just done. 3 weeks before the hoodie hit the table, I sat in a booth at O'Malley's, a bar that smelled like decades of honest work and spilled beer. The kind of place where the bartender knows your drink and nobody bothers you about networking. Neil Palmer sat across from me, reading glasses perched on his nose, scrolling through a 70-page service agreement on his tablet. He was 56, looked 60, and had the kind of cynicism you only get from 20 years doing contract law for the Department of Defense. We'd met 15 years back when Viren was consulting on a Navy logistics project. I was the technical lead. Neil was the guy making sure nobody could sue the government if our software crashed a supply chain. We'd stayed in touch. Quarterly beers, the occasional golf game where we both shot terrible and didn't care. He whistled low through his teeth. "Sam, you sure you want to do this?" I sipped my scotch. "Good stuff. Not the well whiskey they serve to tourists. They've been treating me like an employee. But I've been acting like a contractor through my LLC. It's time I got some protection. Here's what you need to know about corporate America. Everyone talks about loyalty until the quarter looks bad. Then suddenly, you're overhead. You're legacy drag. You're the expensive guy who asks too many questions about where the money's actually going. I'd seen it coming for months. Madison showing up to operations meetings with buzzwords and no understanding. Taking credit for systems I'd built in front of investors who didn't know the difference. Slowly pushing me out of decision loops while pretending it was about empowering the next generation of leadership. The insurance policy in question was a licensing clause buried in our vendor consolidation contract. See, while everyone focused on our flashy product demos and Madison's innovation theater, I'd spent 18 months rebuilding Viren's operational backbone. The ERP integration, the fulfillment protocols, the compliance infrastructure. Problem was, none of it was proprietary company IP. We'd been Frankensteining together third-party tools like every startup does. Duct tape and prayers. So I built something better. Clean, secure, scalable. And I did it through my own LLC, Porter Systems Architecture. It had been on Viren's vendor ledger for years, buried under platform integration services. Nobody noticed when the invoicing structure changed slightly. Nobody blinked when I submitted a master services agreement that routed licensing rights to my LLC instead of Viren. And nobody, especially not Madison, read the legal language about revocation of rights upon improper dismissal of key personnel. Neil took his glasses off, rubbed his eyes. Section 8.4C. Upon termination without formal review and documented cause, perpetual license shall immediately revert to Porter Systems Architecture, LLC. Sam, this is elegant. Maybe too elegant. Is it legal? Completely. He smiled. The kind of smile lawyers get when they find a perfect loophole. But you understand what you're building here? If they fire you wrong, and I mean procedurally wrong, no documentation, no cause, this clause activates automatically. They lose access to everything you built. No lawsuit, no arbitration, just lights out. I finished my scotch, then they better fire me right. But I knew they wouldn't. Madison was arrogant. Richard was weak. And HR was too busy managing culture initiatives to bother with actual employment law. The agreement passed through Viren's legal department like gas through a chain-link fence. Rubber-stamped, filed, forgotten. I even tested it on a sandbox server first. Ran it through external counsel who owed me a favor from the Navy days. Not a single red flag. The compliance team, God bless their overworked souls, logged it into the licensing repository like it was just another vendor line item. Because that's what it looked like. Boring contract administration. The kind of paperwork that makes people's eyes glaze over. You know what's funny about corporate life? The quiet ones are always the most dangerous. Everyone watches the loud guy making threats in meetings. Nobody pays attention to the old engineer who just keeps showing up and doing his job. After I got the agreement signed, I printed one copy. Just one. Stored it in a fireproof safe in my garage next to my discharge papers from the Navy and the deed to my truck. The digital version got AES 256 encryption and 3 backups, one in secure cloud storage in Iceland, one on a flash drive in my desk drawer, one on my personal laptop that never touched company Wi-Fi. I didn't want to use it. Let me be clear about that. I liked my job, didn't love the politics or Madison's condescending Sammy nickname she used in meetings, but I loved building things that worked. I loved mentoring the junior engineers. I loved knowing that when someone had a problem at 3 in the morning, they called me because I'd actually answer and actually fix it. But every time Madison smiled at me with those perfect veneers and called my experience legacy thinking, I felt that trigger finger twitch. And when I caught her deleting Slack messages about budget reallocation, I knew the countdown had started. 2 months before she fired me, I found it. The smoking gun. I'd been reviewing the Q4 bonus allocation because something smelled off. We were supposedly under budget, yet performance bonuses were delayed. I pulled the raw disbursement logs, cross-referenced them against payroll, then checked them against project completion reports. There it was, a series of transfers labeled Innovation Summit Expenses, $24,700. Recipient, Madison Thornton personal account. I clicked deeper. The invoice ID led nowhere. Not in the vendor system, not in the accounting software. Nothing but a fake vendor code and a timestamp 3 days before our bonus notifications got pushed back because of compliance review. Madison had manually overridden the bonus pool allocation, diverted it to herself, called it a team development initiative. The initiative where she developed herself a week-long trip to Tulum with 6 friends from business school. I printed that report on my home printer. Didn't email it, didn't save it on company servers. Just slipped it into a folder and put it on my bookshelf between my Navy technical manuals and a Tom Clancy novel I'd been meaning to read for 3 years. Evidence, just in case. I didn't tell anyone I'd been fired. Not right away. Didn't update LinkedIn with some cheerful excited for my next chapter post. Didn't call my daughter in Portland to explain why her old man suddenly had free time on a Tuesday afternoon. Didn't reach out to the junior engineers I'd been mentoring to let them know they were on their own now. I just disappeared. Let me tell you something about ghosting a company. It's not like ghosting a bad date. With a date, you block the number and move on. With a company, especially one you built the guts of, you remove your fingerprints and watch their mess come into focus. My email shut down at 5 p.m. that day, exactly like Rachel from HR said it would. Access badges deactivated. VPN credentials revoked. According to their systems, Sam Porter no longer existed. But the systems Sam Porter built? Those kept running. For about 72 hours. Then things started breaking. First sign of trouble came from a customer email I saw by accident. One of the junior engineers, kid named Tyler, who I'd taught everything he knew about database architecture, had forwarded something to my personal email 3 days after I left. He didn't know I'd been fired yet, just thought I was out sick. Sam, customer says their fulfillment pipeline is throwing errors. Same fix as last time? Can't find your documentation on the vendor portal workaround. There was no documentation. Not in Viron's systems anyway. That particular workaround lived in my head and in my LLC's private repository. It was the Band-Aid that kept their biggest customers' orders flowing when the third-party vendor's portal crashed every Tuesday like clockwork. I didn't respond to Tyler. Kid would figure it out eventually or he wouldn't. Not my circus anymore. 3 days later, the finance team discovered they couldn't close the monthly books. Their revenue projection was off by $1.3 million. They blamed it on QuickBooks API delays in their all-hands meeting. I knew because Richard's assistant, sweet lady named Barbara who always remembered my coffee order, accidentally CC'd me on the meeting notes before realizing I didn't work there anymore. The real problem? They'd never learned the 2-step audit process I'd built into the revenue recognition system. The one that cross-checked contract dates against delivery confirmations before booking the sale. I'd tried to train the finance team on it 4 times. They kept saying they'd get to it after their ASANA certification course. Now they were manually reconciling spreadsheets like it was 1995. The tech stack started crumbling next. 3 microservices went down simultaneously on a Friday afternoon. Their DevOps contractor, some guy Madison hired after one visionary leadership conversation at a networking event, couldn't figure out why. I could have told him. The backend schema used my naming conventions. The database relationships followed logic I'd built over 12 years of actually understanding what the business needed versus what looked good in a pitch deck. You can't just Google that kind of institutional knowledge. You especially can't Google it when the documentation is stored in Porter Systems Architecture's repository, not Viren's. Madison sent out a company-wide Slack message that Friday. I saw it because Tyler screenshotted it and texted it to me, still not knowing I was gone. Bro, what's happening? Everything's on fire. The message was pure Madison. Team, we're experiencing a growth recalibration phase as we transition to fully digital native operations. This is exactly the kind of challenge that helps us reclaim our operational sovereignty and step into our next level potential. Operational sovereignty. That's corporate speak, for we have no idea what we're doing, but we're going to brand it like a wellness retreat. Meanwhile, SLAs started slipping. Customer onboarding timelines doubled. The support team's Slack channel turned into a war zone of confused messages and panicked escalations. One of the senior sales guys quit, just walked out on a Tuesday morning and never came back. Posted on LinkedIn about pursuing alignment with my personal values. Everyone knew that meant he'd seen the writing on the wall and found a life raft. The board meeting minutes from week 2, Barbara CC'd me again, bless her heart, showed them trying to figure out what was happening. Larry Bishop, the CFO, kept asking about platform stability concerns and vendor dependency assessment. Madison's response, according to the minutes, we have a resilient team culture that can overcome any legacy architecture challenges. Legacy architecture challenges. That was me. I was the challenge. The guy who actually knew how everything worked. Here's what nobody tells you about being the person who built everything. When you leave, the building doesn't collapse immediately. It settles. Cracks appear. Little problems become big problems. And eventually, someone important asks the question nobody wants to answer. Who designed this system, and can we call them? That question came up in week 3. I know because Neil Palmer called me at 8:30 on a Wednesday night, laughing so hard he could barely talk. Sam, you're not going to believe this. I just got a call from Alan Brewster. He's outside counsel for Viren. Asked me, very informally, he stressed that 3 times, if you might be available for consulting on some time-sensitive vendor matters. I was in my garage, rebuilding the carburetor on my Silverado. Had Steely Dan playing on the radio, grease under my fingernails. First time I'd felt relaxed in months. What did you tell him? Told him you were unavailable for informal anything. He sounded like he was sweating through his Brooks Brothers suit. I wiped my hands on a shop rag. They're prepping for the Series C pitch. Week away, according to my sources. Neil paused. You know what you're about to do, right? I did. I'd known since the moment Madison slid that extra-large hoodie across the table. Since Richard sat there silent and let his daughter humiliate someone who'd helped him build his company from nothing. You know what the best revenge is? It's not rage. It's not some dramatic speech about justice and loyalty. It's patience. It's letting incompetent people talk long enough to bury themselves. It's watching them realize, too late, that the quiet guy they dismissed was the load-bearing wall. Yeah, I said. I know exactly what I'm doing. The boardroom was all glass and hubris. 27th floor, panoramic view of the bay, one of those conference tables that probably cost more than my annual salary. This was Viren's moment, the Series C pitch with Sequoia Capital, $68 million on the line. Madison was dressed for coronation. Navy blazer, designer heels, that water bottle with motivational timestamps printed on the side. Crush at 9 a.m. You're unstoppable 2 p.m. That kind of thing. I sat in the back row. Yeah, I was there. Doug Barrett, the lead investor from Sequoia, had insisted on having technical continuity in the room for the infrastructure due diligence questions. The board was too flustered to object, and by the time Madison found out that morning, it was too late to uninvite me without looking suspicious. The look on her face when she saw me in the lobby. Like she'd bitten into an apple and found half a worm. But she powered through, smiled that trust fund smile and pretended I was just another chair in the corner. Her PowerPoint had animations, actual animations, slides about scaling and synergy and architecting the future of digital commerce. Not one word about system stability, not one mention of the operational backbone that made any of this possible. Just buzzwords stacked like a Jenga tower waiting for someone to pull the wrong piece. Doug Barrett sat at the head of the table. 52 years old, son of a union electrician from Pittsburgh, made his money backing companies that actually built things instead of just talking about building things. He had a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions. He let Madison finish her section about culture-forward growth strategy. Then he opened his leather folder, slowly, the way a coroner might open a body bag. Before we discuss terms, Doug said, voice calm as a surgeon, I need to clarify something about your technical infrastructure. Madison's smile tightened. Of course. Our DevOps team has built an incredibly robust platform. Who architected your ERP integration system? Silence. The kind of silence where you can hear the air conditioning and everyone's thoughts at the same time. Madison glanced at Richard. Richard suddenly found something fascinating about his phone. Larry Bishop, the CFO, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Our platform team handles all technical architecture, Madison said carefully. We've built a really resilient system with multiple redundancies. Doug pulled out a document, set it on the table. This is your master services agreement with Porter Systems Architecture, LLC. Section 8.4C, signed 3 years ago, still active according to your vendor ledger. I watched Madison's knuckles go white on her water bottle. Doug continued reading. Exclusive licensing of operational infrastructure contingent upon continued employment of Samuel Porter, designated as key personnel. Upon termination without formal cause and review, license reverts immediately to Porter Systems Architecture. He looked up. Mr. Porter was terminated 3 weeks ago. According to this termination memo, he held up another page, for performance misalignment with no documented review process. Rachel from HR made a small sound, like a balloon deflating. That's just a technicality, Madison said. Her voice had gone up half an octave. It's legacy contract language. We have full operational control of our systems. No, Doug said. Flat, final, you don't. According to this agreement, the moment you fired Sam Porter without proper cause documentation, you lost licensing rights to your entire operational backbone, the ERP integration, the fulfillment protocols, the compliance infrastructure, the vendor management system. He paused. Everything this pitch is built on, you no longer have legal right to operate. Richard finally spoke. His voice came out hoarse. That can't be right. Legal reviewed all our vendor contracts. Your legal department signed off on this in 2022, Doug said. It's filed, notarized, registered with your licensing repository. It's been sitting in your system for 3 years. He looked around the table. Did anyone actually read your vendor agreements? More silence. Madison's face had gone from boardroom tan to paste white. This is insane, she said. Sam worked for us. He can't just, we'll get another license, we'll rebuild. With what? Doug's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath. The schema documentation? That's in Porter's repository. The integration logic? Same place. The institutional knowledge about how your systems actually work? He gestured toward me. That's sitting in the back row. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just sat there neutral as a wall while 12 executives realized they'd built their company on a foundation they didn't own. Doug stood up, started packing his folder. What you've shown me today is vaporware, a product demo running on systems you don't have rights to. Every customer contract you've signed is potentially fraudulent. Every revenue projection is based on infrastructure you're operating illegally. Wait. Madison stood up too fast. Her chair rolled backward and hit the glass wall. We can fix this. Sam, we can work something out. A new contract, licensing fees, whatever you want. Doug turned to me. Mr. Porter, would you be interested in consulting on a licensing resolution? Here's the moment everyone talks about in revenge stories. The big speech, the dramatic declaration, the how do you like me now moment. I thought about giving them that. Thought about explaining exactly how long I'd been planning this. How many nights I'd spent documenting their incompetence and Madison's embezzlement and Richard's cowardice. Instead, I just said, no, one word, clean, final. I stood up, walked past the table where Madison was still standing, past Richard, who couldn't meet my eyes, past the CFO, who looked like he'd just watched his boat sink, and out the glass doors. Behind me, I heard Doug's voice. This meeting is over. Sequoia is withdrawing from consideration. The hallway was quiet, cold, empty. My footsteps echoed on polished concrete as I walked to the elevator. My phone buzzed before I reached the parking garage. Email from Doug Barrett. Subject line, acquisition interest, your terms. I didn't open it right away. Just drove home through 70-degree sunshine, Steely Dan on the radio, window down. Took the long way past the old Viron building. Saw the lights still on at 6 p.m. on every floor. Imagined the chaos inside. The emergency meetings, the lawyers scrambling. Madison trying to explain to her father how she'd just destroyed everything he'd built. I kept driving. Got home. Cracked open that good scotch I'd been saving. Sat in my garage with the door open, looking at my Silverado with its new carburetor purring like a dream. You know what the best part of revenge is? It's not the moment they realize what you did. It's the moment after. When you realize you don't need them anymore. When you understand that your value wasn't tied to their opinion of you. When you know, really know, that you built something they can't replace. My phone buzzed again. Text from Neil Palmer. Heard Sequoia walked. You beautiful bastard. I smiled. First real smile in 3 weeks. Tomorrow, I'd read Doug's acquisition offer. Maybe take that board advisor role he'd probably mention. Maybe just license the infrastructure back to Viren at rates that would make Madison's MBA professors weep. But tonight I had some plumbing to finish. And a carburetor that needed one more adjustment. And a quiet garage that smelled like oil and possibility. Turns out, legacy thinking is just another way of saying I know how things actually work. And sometimes, that's the only thing worth knowing.